Good afternoon. Continue to get your plates of food and sit down, make yourself comfortable. We're going to go ahead and get started. So, hello. My name's Lisa Youngblade, and I'm honored to serve as the Dean of the College of Health and Human Sciences. And welcome to our fifth annual College of Health and Human Sciences Research Day Keynote Address. Before we start, I want to engage in what we do when we come together, and that is to celebrate CSU's land acknowledgement. So I'm proud and humbled to introduce our land acknowledgement to you today. When our community gathers, we share the land acknowledgement to respect and reflect upon our responsibilities to our histories that are vibrantly alive today. The indigenous communities who were the original stewards of CSU's land were also examples of nations committed to education and democratic traditions. We're grateful to the indigenous faculty, staff, and students, as well as additional community members who crafted this statement. This beautiful video, which was also directed by a Native faculty member, is a powerful representation of the actions and commitments required by us all to address our historical beginnings.
Colorado State University acknowledges with respect that the land we are on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples.
This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other Native nations.
We recognize the indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it.
As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed.
CSU is a land-grant institution, and we accept that our mission must encompass access to education and inclusion.
And significantly, that our founding came at a dire cost to Native nations and peoples whose land this university was built upon.
This acknowledgement is the education and inclusion we must practice in recognizing our institutional history, responsibility, and commitment.
Thank you. Before we introduce our speaker today, I'd like to thank everyone for making Research Day a meaningful celebration of the outstanding work in our academic units. Today, we're celebrating research and creative scholarship in this wonderfully complex college. Discoveries that impact construction management, design and merchandising, education, food science and human nutrition, health and exercise science, human development and family studies, occupational therapy, and education and social work. We're improving physical, mental, and social well-being in all aspects of the human experience through advancements in science, in research, and the application of that knowledge. In keeping with our land-grant heritage, our goal is to change lives for the better. Through the research poster session, the keynote address, and lightning talks by our faculty and Dean's Fellows, today we will witness example after example of the transformative magic that happens when brilliance, compassion, and innovation come together in our college. He had an interesting conversation with Dr. Neha Loda from Health and Exercise Science early in the morning. She came up and said, "Happy Research Day." And so I reflected on that for a moment. This has now become an event in our college that is a thing that is just exciting. And then she said, it's like a family reunion, coming home for a really good meal. So again, reflecting on this, thinking like we are a family, we're a community. The conversation in the ballroom where we had close to 100 posters in there, classes coming through, friends and partners who've come to learn about our research, to talk, to ask questions, to collaborate. All of this is what families do. They do it over meals, literally right now. But they do it intellectually as well. And so pleased about today. We also, I think, hit a milestone today in Research Day, and we are now officially an international event. So I want to explicitly welcome our friends who are visiting from Yamagata Prefectural University in Japan. Not only are they visiting, they had a poster at Research Day. So welcome to our friends. When things happen to each other. One of those events is a birthday. Celebrate events when things happen to each other. One of those events is a birthday. And somebody in our family in this room is celebrating a birthday today, Mr. Avery Martin. And I want to ask you to join me in singing happy birthday to Avery. He works his guts out on social media and supporting our Research Day. But let's for a moment celebrate Avery. So I'm going to scarily start this, but happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Avery. Happy birthday to you. We have birthday cake too, because we just got to do that. So I think it's over here. When you feel like getting a piece, hop up and get some. But now I am delighted to ask Dr. Kris Melby, professor in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition, to come up and introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Kris Osterberg.
Thank you, Dean Youngblood. It's an honor, it's a privilege to be able to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Kris Osterberg, a former student, research assistant in my lab, a colleague of more than 30 years, and a friend of mine and my entire family. Kris is a two-time graduate of CSU, principal scientist at Gatorade from Florence, Wisconsin. And you might imagine she's originally from Florence, Wisconsin. And you might imagine she's an avid Green Bay Packers fan. And I mean really avid. I first understood this when the Packers suffered a rare loss on a Sunday afternoon. The entire next day on Monday in our lab, Kris's productivity in the lab was marred by her depressive state, and she was in fact quite grouchy. She attended CSU on a basketball scholarship, where she was known for her excellent three-point shooting. In fact, she held the record for the most three-point baskets made in a single game, and removed her from the record book, and that was Becky Hammond. And removed her from the record book, and that was Becky Hammond. So she obtained her first degree in health and exercise science, and then she went on to earn her MS degree in food science and human nutrition. She conducted research in my laboratory looking at the impact of exercise on post-exercise metabolism and appetite regulation. She became a registered dietitian, and she took a job with Gatorade Sports Science in Bradenton, Illinois. Her Ph.D. at Virginia Tech. She left and went and finished her Ph.D. at Virginia Tech. And her research focused on the impact of probiotics and diet on metabolic health, and then she returned to Gatorade. Dr. Osterberg enjoys spending time with her husband, her 3 dogs, traveling and playing outdoors. And let me give you an idea what she means or how she interprets playing outdoors. So on her 40th birthday, she happened to be in Fort Collins, and I had dinner with her. I said, how'd you spend your day? Well, I'm turning 40, so I decided to run 40 miles. On her 50th, she ran 50 miles. I've asked her this morning if she's planning on running 60 on her 60th, and she said yes, if I'm able. This last fall, she completed the West Virginia trilogy. Day 1, they run 50K. Day 2, they run 50 miles, and then the 3rd day, they run a half marathon. So you can see that she loves to suffer. We spent numerous expeditions in mountains and had great times together. But I am pleased that she's here. She's going to present her talk on compasses and clocks, finding your path, which I think ties very nicely with the interest that a lot of our grad students have on what sort of career paths are ahead of them. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kris Osterberg to the podium.
For most of my 20s, I watched my friends becoming adults. They were getting into the graduate schools that I couldn't get into. They were launching their careers. Many of them were getting married and starting families. They had their maps highlighted and their compasses pointed north. I, on the other hand, was having a lot of trouble finding my map, and I've never been super confident I know how to properly use a compass. I was definitely moving in a direction, but I wasn't sure if it was the right one for me. As an undergrad, I majored in what was at the time my intention was to become a physical therapist. Now, my intention was to become a physical therapist. Now, I'd known since the 6th grade that I was going to be a PT. My dad was a PT. I knew that was the career for me. In fact, I was one of 5 people on the basketball team who had that career goal. Now, there are 2 reasons why that goal was a bit problematic for me. The first was because I didn't work real hard in classes that either didn't interest me or I couldn't see really pertaining to my physical therapy goals. So my GPA was unimpressive. The second reason was I had a tendency to lose consciousness when I perceived that a patient was in pain. So when I was an undergrad, I worked as a physical therapy aide in a hospital back in Michigan during the summers. And then when I graduated, I worked in a couple of orthopedic clinics here in town. And whenever I was given the task of doing range of motion with somebody who had an ACL repair or a rotator cuff repair, if they would wince or grimace at all, I would have to lie down on the floor to keep from fainting. So they spent a whole lot more time consoling me than I ever did helping them. One time I was working in a hospital and I was supposed to debride a burn patient, and the burn patient had become septic. So I was scraping the dead skin and the infection off of him, and we were in this hot, humid whirlpool room. And I thought, oh my God, I better leave here before I completely lose it. So I went out into the greater physical therapy area, and I laid down on a mat table to try to pull myself together. And I woke up, and my shirt was open, and people were yelling at me and saying, you know, what are you doing here? I said, well, I work here. And they closed my shirt up. I don't know why that was open in the first place, but they stuck me on a gurney and wheeled me into a hospital room. So clearly, I needed to find a different path. In spite of my unimpressive grades and mediocre test scores, he clearly saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. So I was relieved to be heading down a road. And for me, this was going to be a pretty long road because I had 45 credits of prerequisites I needed to take to even qualify for my RD credential. And so even though I was happy to be heading in a direction, I wasn't sure if it was the right one for me. Now, not knowing if my compass was pointed in the right direction it caused me a lot of self-doubt, caused a lot of anxiety, and I had just this overwhelming sense that the clock of my life was ticking away. And I suspect some of you might feel that same way, particularly because you've had to navigate part of your education through a pandemic. And I imagine that the pandemic was hard from a social aspect, just because you can't have interactions with your professors in person like you used to. Your professors have a whole new set of challenges trying to get their classes online and keep their research projects going. There's fewer opportunities to be engaged in events on campus, fewer opportunities to see your classmates in person for help and support. And then for those of you trying to break into the job world, There are fewer internships available, and those that were available were virtual. At least that's how it was in our company. And I think it's really hard to get a sense of the culture of a team or a company when you're working virtually. I was working in sports marketing during most of the pandemic, and my job was remote anyway. And I worked on a team that we had spent a lot of time together. We'd been together for years. We knew each other really well. So the pandemic was really a pretty easy transition for me. I kind of liked it, I have to admit. But then I got a new manager partway through. And she and I had never met. And she was competent and she was a lovely person. But all those things that you learn about spending time together, just idiosyncrasies or sense of humor or ways that you manage stress, we didn't know that about each other. So I spent some of that time feeling a little bit misunderstood. And then, social media, if you're having any problems with anxiety or insecurities, social media only exacerbates those feelings, right? Teddy Roosevelt said that comparison is the thief of joy. And I feel like that needs to be the warning label on every single social media account. When you're looking at the curated images of all your Facebook friends living their very best lives, it only increases any feelings of disconnection or stress you might have. 91% of Gen Z and 87% of millennials say that they're experiencing more stress since the pandemic. 25% of them say that their stress levels are unmanageable. And a third of them cite their uncertainties about the future as the primary cause of their stress. And again, I suspect some of you might feel that same way. Now, finding healthy ways to manage stress is really, really important. And some of you might practice mindfulness. Some of you may do meditation or yoga or play an instrument or art. But as Kris alluded to, I have always run to manage my stress. From the time I was 11 or 12 years old, I'd get up before school and run, or I'd come home in the evenings and run. And I've always thought that running, especially trail running, is just such a microcosm of life. Sometimes you are feeling strong and your feet are going where you want them to go and you're just on top of the world. And then sometimes you are slogging up a steep hill and your legs are dead and you're not sure if you're going to make it. And then sometimes, if you're on a trail system that's not heavily trafficked or well-maintained, you may not even know if you're on a trail. And that's how I felt through part of my graduate school. Like, I'm wandering around trying to find my trail. Some of you know you're on a trail. You just don't know if you're heading in the right direction. And then there are others of you who are sure-footed and confident that you're exactly where you need to be. But I want to encourage you, whether or not you feel confident or whether or not your confidence is waning right now, just run your own pace. Try not to compare yourself to the other people that are on the trail. Now, for me, not knowing if my compass was pointed in the right direction was especially problematic because I've always been that goal-oriented finish line person. I'd sign up for a marathon or an ultra, and I'd be so excited about the race. And I'd think about the days right around the race, like, where will I stay? Will I camp? Will I find a hotel? What restaurants are around there? What other things might I want to see the day after the race? But 4 or 5 months out, when it comes time to actually put my shoes on and train for the thing, I was much less enthusiastic about that, to the point that I'd resent training and wonder, is this something I even want to do? And again, that's how I felt in graduate school, that, okay, I'm focused on the finish. I want to get a job. I want to start making some money. But this road is going to be really long. It's going to take a very long time. And I'm not sure if it's the finish line that I actually want to get to. Well, the good news is, in life, finish lines and ticking clocks aren't real. They're constructs. They're subjective. They feel real because we say we want to accomplish X, Y, Z, and we want to do that by a certain date or a certain age. And so that sets that finish line out there and it starts the clock ticking. And society definitely does this to us too, right? Society tells us we're supposed to be meeting certain milestones by certain ages and kind of shames us if we're not on their timetable. So again, I want us to say, try to ignore other people's ticking clocks and compasses. Now, I kind of lost my train of thought. Okay. Goals are essential. They're essential to help us move forward. But they're just stepping stones to your higher aspirations. They're not finish lines in and of themselves. Your higher aspirations are what give meaning. And meaning gives purpose to those smaller goals. Now, your aspirations right now may be like mine were, to finish school, get a job, start making money. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I want to encourage you to check in with your soul just every so often. Make sure that your aspirations are aligning with your values. Over time, if your aspirations and your values are out of alignment, no matter how much success you achieve, you're going to start to feel a little empty and disillusioned. Now, I know that there's pressure to pay off your bills and to pay off your loans and to start making money. I totally understand it, believe me. But that pressure creates stress. And if you're feeling stressed, you will always be focused on the time. And if you think that your time is running out or you're short on time, you're going to overlook opportunities that can spark your curiosity and spark your interest. Things like internship opportunities or volunteer opportunities or travel, all of these things take time. And I want to just challenge you to think a little bit differently. Because if you have a chance to pursue any of these things and you have any interest in it, please take the time to do it. These are the things that help you get to know yourself. And they help open your mind to the other opportunities that are out there for you. Now, I figured out what I wanted to do finally my last semester of graduate school. And it took me 3.5 years to finish graduate school. It was a class that Kris taught with Lauren Cordain in exercise and nutrition. And I absolutely loved it. And I thought, finally, this is what I want to do. So I told him about it, and he thankfully hired me when I finished school to work in his lab and just coordinate a few small research projects he had going on. And again, I absolutely loved it. Now, I didn't make a ton of money. So for extra money, I worked as a TA for Martha Stone's food science class. And I worked part-time in a health club, and I was a nanny to my friend's 2 little boys while she tried to get her physical therapy practice off the ground. Now, if you were to look at me during this stage of my life, you probably would have thought, this girl's having a hard time getting it together. I was in my late 20s. I was living in this 10 by 10 foot shack out in Severance. I was driving a car with over 200,000 miles on it. Things would fall off and I would just throw them in the trunk. I was not the outward vision of success by any stretch. But I found my spark. I was really happy because I finally figured out what it is I wanted to do. So, and this 2 or 3 years of my life really set a stage for everything else that came after. Now, being a part of Kris's research team helped open my eyes to a career I had never even considered. I didn't even think I was going to like research, much less love research. And understanding what your options are, I think really can help you clarify what your aspirations can be. Not just what you want to do, but who you want to be. And I think when your aspirations are more clear, it helps silence that ticking clock just a little bit, because you can start to find some purpose in your smaller goals. Now, for me, the one clock that was ticking that I couldn't ignore anymore was the clock on my dietetic internship. You only have a certain amount of time to to start your internship after you finished classes, and my time was quickly running out. So I wasn't excited to do it for a couple reasons. Number one, I was going to have to work full-time for a full year for free, and also because I knew by that time I wasn't going to become a dietitian in any traditional sense, and so you know, it was a whole reason that I had started graduate school in the first place, so I knew this is something I had to do. For fun, just for this talk, I Googled, how old is too old to do an internship? And, you know, Google auto-populates your question, so, you know, Google says, is 30 too old? Is 33 too old? Is 40 too old? Google says no. But it does become more difficult to do these things the older you get because it's hard to work for free, right? It's hard to take that much time. So when I started my internship at the University of Northern Colorado, I was 31. And I would so much love to tell you that, well, it took me by surprise and I completely loved it. Well, I did not love it. It was hard for me. It was a hard year. I was running all over northern Colorado from Greeley to Longmont to Boulder, trying to get my rotations done. I was teaching 2 classes in the evening at Front Range Community College just to try to keep my head above water financially. I remember one time I was working in the Weld County School District, and I had been sent out to cover a staff shortage at an elementary school, and I was given the prime position of pot washer. And so I had my big yellow rubber gloves on and my hairnet, and I had kind of worn nicer clothes because I actually thought I was going to be working in an office that day, and I kept spraying myself with that stupid overheading pot washing hose. I was soaking wet, generally annoyed with life. And the kitchen manager came up to me and said, "Now, honey, if I were as young as you, I'd go get myself an education." And which I kind of laughed to myself because I thought if you were counting my internship as part of my education by that time, I'd been in college for 9 years. So clearly I agreed with her on that. Now, if my life were a trail run, that year of my life would have been a long, hard, uphill slog. There were times, I mean, I knew probably inside somewhere that I was going to make it, but I couldn't see myself at the top of this hill. And, but I will say that this internship and the time that I spent in that year just opened so many doors for me down the line, and I've been so grateful that I actually took the time to do it. If my nearly 55-year-old self could go back and tell what I now consider that young woman anything, I would say, keep your aspirations or your why in sight. Keep your why clear. And stay focused on your goals, the what you need to do to accomplish your why. But don't be so focused on the how. I think I made myself miserable that year asking, how is this all going to work out for me? Roy T. Bennett said, "Don't be pushed around by the fears in your mind, but be led by the dreams in your heart." What I know now, and what I'll tell you, is that the how is going to take care of itself. Doors are going to open for you in places that are completely unexpected and in ways that you can't right now predict. As I was finishing up my internship, a job opened up at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. Now, this was beyond anything I ever would have hoped for myself. But coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, the last study that I had done in Kris's lab had been funded by GSSI. And unbeknownst to me, Kris Melby is what the Gatorade people call a FOG, or a friend of Gatorade. So Kris put in a good word for me when that job opened up, and I got that. And I was over the moon happy, over the moon. I couldn't believe my luck. But every single thing that I had done to that point led to that job being available. If I had skipped any part of it, I wouldn't have gotten it. So I consider that my first real job. And by real, I only mean I didn't have to work 3 other jobs to try to support myself. And when I got that job, I was 32. Now, there are all kinds of statistics now about people getting started later. People are moving out of their parents' homes later. People are getting married later, buying their own homes later. 70% of millennials and Gen Z say that they're taking time, more time, to evaluate their priorities and to really try to figure out what it is that makes them happy. Ken Sheldon is a psychologist that works in motivation, and he thinks this is really important because in general, we don't have a very good sense of what it is that's going to make us happy. He cites 2 kinds of motivation. One kind of motivation is driven by the goals that other people set for us. So our parents or our teachers might see that we have a certain aptitude for a field, and so they encourage us to pursue it. And we do, and we're good at it, but it doesn't necessarily align with what our interests are. That's called non-concordant motivation. And over time, that can lead to some dissatisfaction in your job. The other kind of motivation is when your strengths and your interests are aligned with your inner motivations. That's called self-concordant. And that kind of thing is harder. It takes more time. It takes creativity. But if you can take the time to figure out how your strengths and your interests align with what motivates you, it can really help point you down the right road. Now, over time, as you continue to evaluate your interests, your aspirations can change, and your compass can point you in a completely new direction. Many years ago, a friend of mine said to me, I wasn't sure what you were going to end up doing, but I was pretty sure you weren't going to be unhappy. And you know, that's pretty true about me. And obviously, I think there's something to be said for persistence and perseverance and grit. But I also think there's something to be said for knowing when it's time to move on. So at 40, I decided to leave my dream job and go get a Ph.D. Now, I'd known that I wanted to do this since the time I was at CSU. It was always on my radar. And through a confluence of some personal and professional things that came up, I thought this is a good time for me to do that. Now, the people who were older than me, who really cared about me, thought this was a horrible idea. Like, why would you do this? You finally just got a job. And you're well paid and you're secure. Why would you do this? Well, I kind of wanted to be happy, but I also thought that getting a PhD was going to be a little detour that I would take, and then I would get back on the road, and I'd have more opportunities available to me down the road. Well, now, I didn't make a major change in my career. Like I said, this is a little detour, but there are lots of examples now about people who make abrupt changes in their career. Maybe working 25 or 30 years in a field and then changing into something totally different. Now, while I was at Virginia Tech, I studied the gut microbiome, and I came across the research of Dr. Alexandra Brand. She's the woman on the far right. She's a microbiologist at the University of Aberdeen. Now, Dr. Brand wasn't always a microbiologist. She used to be in advertising, and she was really successful. She worked in London and she worked in New York, and then her husband got transferred to Saudi Arabia. So she went with him there, and she quickly realized that the opportunities that were available to her in the West were not going to be available to her in Saudi Arabia. She couldn't work, she couldn't drive, she could barely leave her house. So she started raising some livestock. And as part of caring for her animals, she started learning about microbiology and parasitology, and she started communicating with a professor at the University of Aberdeen, and he encouraged her to pursue her degree because she was so interested in it. So at 40, she enrolled in the microbiology program there, and she worked her way through to a PhD, and she works as a scientist. The AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, says that over 60% of people over the age of 50 since the pandemic have reevaluated their work-life balance and how their job fits into their lives. They recently featured a story on Barbara Vargo. She's on the far left. Barbara worked in hospice for 25 years, and then she started to become a little more dissatisfied with her job. Her kids left the house to go to college, and she decided to become an attorney. And she was nervous about it. She's like, but what if it doesn't work out for me? She says, if it didn't work out, I'll just refocus my energy somewhere else. So she became an attorney at 52. Carl Allenby, there in the middle, was a car mechanic for 25 years. He owned his own auto repair business. And he said his job was so stressful that he never could disconnect, not even on vacation. And he just thought, it's going to be like that for the rest of his working life. He was going to business school to help him run his business, and he took a class in biology that reignited a love that he had when he was a kid. He re-enrolled in pre-med, and he became a physician at 51. He says he works in the ER now, and he says his job is infinitely less stressful than it was as a car mechanic. I can believe that. Now, these are just 3 examples of people who made really major changes in their career. There are many more stories like this. The problem is the media focuses on the wunderkinds, right? These 22-year-old multimillionaires. Well, those kids are the unicorns. They're the exceptions to the rule. There are many more examples of people who continue to achieve great things throughout their life. Now, I was 45 when I finished my Ph.D. And after working a year as a clinical research coordinator at Virginia Tech, I got a job with Gatorade Sports Marketing. So my position was called a team sports manager, and I worked with the sports medicine and sports performance staffs of all the teams that Gatorade's contracted with, in the NBA, the NFL, the MLB. I had all the teams in Canada, in the NHL, so I got to travel all through Canada. And I met some amazing people and had some incredible experiences. And then when the pandemic hit, I was one of the people over 50 who was reevaluating my career. I missed research a lot. And I couldn't figure out really how to get back, but after being away from GSSI for 12 years, I went back to what I consider my work home. But neither one of these opportunities would have been available to me had I not made my detour. Now, experts predict that people who are now in their early to mid-20s will change their career 6 times in the course of their lives. That's 2 to 3 times more than people my age. And I think if there's a lesson to come from these stories, it's that you don't have to feel stuck. You can change your path. You can change your direction. It's not too late. Now, I think there are 3 advantages to being a late bloomer, which is what I would consider myself. The first advantage is learning self-efficacy through your self-doubt. Oftentimes, if you're having trouble figuring out where you want to go, it can create a lot of self-doubt. And that self-doubt can sometimes serve to stop you or turn you around, but it can also serve as a really powerful motivator. Rich Karlgaard wrote a book called Late Bloomers, The Hidden Strengths of Learning and Succeeding at Your Own Pace. And he writes that when we look at successful people, or we look at high achievers, we assume that they're above self-doubt, that they've somehow transcended it. But many of them are filled with self-doubt. It's what keeps them growing, it's what keeps them learning. Karlgaard talks about how self-doubt and self-efficacy are actually linked. Self-efficacy is the knowledge that if we put our minds to something and if we work hard at it, we can be successful. Self-doubt can just create enough anxiety within us that it can just make us buckle down and focus. And self-efficacy can keep moving us forward. Self-doubt can be your spark, and self-efficacy can be your fuel. So embrace your self-doubts. Don't fear them. Use them to help you grow. Now, the second advantage of being a late bloomer is our capacity for empathy. Empathy for those who might be looking for their own signposts along the way. Every year, the University of Florida puts on a program called Stay in the Game, And it's opportunity for the female athletes of the university to interact with women who are in sports adjacent careers. So I do research in athletes. Somebody else might be an attorney for a sports team or in media or athletic training. It runs the gamut of professions. But we spend an evening together, we have dinner, we talk about our career paths, and then we can serve as a resource for them as they're trying to chart their own course. And knowing the huge impact that people have had on my career, I'm very conscious of my responsibility to be a mentor for younger scientists and dietitians, to just provide them some perspective and encouragement. And I think the third superpower comes from our support systems. Everybody needs encouragement, everybody. Nowadays, race directors put people's first names on their bib so that strangers can cheer for them. There's something incredibly motivating about somebody who knows your name and tells you can do it. Or gives you a little kick in the pants if that is what's required at that time. Now, every move in my career has come from my relationships, not casual friendships, but genuine relationships. I got the job at GSSI because of Kris. When it was time for me to get a Ph.D., I reached out to Brenda and Kevin Davey. I'd known them from my years here at CSU. Brenda was a Ph.D. student of Kris's, and Kevin worked in exercise science. So they got me to Virginia Tech. They got me a position as an instructor, and then Kevin took me on as a Ph.D. student. And then when I was finished with my Ph.D., I got a call out of the blue from my friend Maggie LaCambra, who worked in Gatorade Sports Marketing. Maggie and I were very good friends because of my years at GSSI. I did a lot of research at the time with NBA teams, and many of them were Maggie's teams. So we spent a lot of time together and became great friends. And now, 25 years later, we're still really good friends. And then when I was thinking about how do I get back into research, I got a random email from James Carter, who's the senior director of GSSI. Jim and I had become friends because we were both runners. So when we were together in cities, we'd go for runs together. We got to know each other really well and became friends. And it was never a thought in my mind that I was ever going to go back to GSSI. I just really, really liked the guy. So when that job opened up, he thought of me. Here's a pro tip. People like to work with their friends. So make friends, become friends with people that you like and you admire. I always shudder at the term networking, as probably every introvert does. But Susan Cain, who's an author, said that one genuine new relationship is worth a fistful of business cards. And I couldn't agree more. So, what is success to you? What does it mean? Success might be material success. It might be a big salary and a big house and a nice car. Success might be a job title, president or CEO or full professor. I definitely do not hold myself up as some paragon of success. But I have a job that I enjoy, and I work with people that I genuinely like and respect. I'm healthy, I can travel, I have strong relationships with my friends and family. My life is really beyond anything that I would have planned for myself. But write that definition for yourself. Don't let society, or God forbid, social media, tell you what success looks like. Figure out what fulfills you, what brings you contentment, what brings you joy, and then chase after those things. I recently had a call with my college friends. We all graduated here about the same time and went our separate directions. Not a single one of them became a physical therapist, by the way. But I asked them, if you could change anything about your trajectory, would you do it? And none of them would. And none of us are in places that we thought we were going to be in. But we're all really happy. And so all I want to say is, enjoy where you are right now, because I guarantee you, you really have no idea where this crazy trail of life is going to take you. Now, I wanted to just leave you with one last thought. When we set our compasses to travel in a certain direction, it's because we envisioned a particular future for ourselves. And when we see ourselves in this future, we see ourselves pretty much like we are right now. Even though we know when we look back, we've changed a lot to get to where we are now, we don't think we're going to change substantially moving forward. Shankar Vedantam calls this the illusion of continuity, that our future self is going to be very much like our present self. When I was 40, I met my husband on the trails of Jefferson National Forest outside of Blacksburg. He was running and I was mountain biking, and when we met, I thought, oh my God, this guy is my kindred spirit. We were so much alike, and we had so much in common, including the fact that we were both undergrads here at CSU at the same time. Now, rewind 20 years. I'm on the basketball team. He's on the bowling team. I am a clean living, mediocre exercise science student. He is a smoking, chewing, smart as a whip computer science nerd. We never would have looked at each other, not in a million years. But now, fast forward 20 years. He is a running, biking health nut. I am a vitamin D deficient, Ph.D. student, science nerd. Neither one of us would have predicted that we would have been those people 20 years earlier as undergrads. It took us 20 years and 1,500 miles to become those people. Now, I tell you that story to say this. You are going to be a different person in 10 or 20 or 30 years. You are. Life is going to change you. It's going to give you some exhilarating highs, and it's going to knock you flat on your back. But just keep moving forward, however slowly you need to. And I promise you, you're going to get to where you're supposed to be in the allotted time, and when you get there, you'll be the person you were meant to be. Thank you. Oh, it's a question and answer. I did a mic drop.
We have an opportunity to continue the discussion. I'm going to ask my friend Chris Melby to come up. We've got a couple of floating microphones. If you're interested in a conversation with Chris, you just need to raise your hand, and us two old farts will come running just as fast as we can. So don't hesitate. We've got a few minutes to sort of continue the conversation. Chris, I want to just sort of get us started. You know, you've had your foot in the academic end of the world and in the industry end of the world, and I wonder if you just might share some observations about touch points where there's similarities that might surprise us if we haven't been in both of those worlds, but also maybe some differences.
Oh.
In 20 minutes or less.
Yeah. Gosh. It's interesting because in industry, I've been in both the R&D side, like I am now, and like I was in my first 8 years at GSSI, and I've also been on what we call the brand side, the marketing side. The thing all of those that academia and industry have in common is that they're all filled with great people. That's the first thing I will say. So you meet great people throughout. I wasn't in a faculty track position. I was an instructor in academia, so I can speak to that part of it. But yeah, I think the difference in industry research, I guess the biggest difference in industry research versus academia, and I don't know because I haven't had to write a grant, but I think what's hard about industry, just being very transparent, is that most of the research that we do has to be driven by a brand priority, right? It has to end in some kind of a product or something that the brand is interested in. It may not be anything that necessarily I'm interested in, but I think sometimes we're allowed to do research for the sake of research itself. But oftentimes, our research always has to have an agenda attached to it, and that's what I don't like. But I also know on the academic side, it's not an easy row to hoe either, right? I mean, you're writing grants and you're trying to get money to do things that, it always has to be things that other people care about too, right? They have to find a priority with it. So that's not a very good answer, Matt, but.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Again, if anybody in the audience, we just need a show of hands and we're happy to get a microphone to you. Now, while I've got the mic and I don't see any hands, I'm gonna just keep on talking. So, you know, you came from an athletic background into exercise science and into sort of what we might call sport nutrition. And, you know, for many people, both in nutrition and exercise science, there's that similarity there. And I'm just interested in your reflections on what's new in sort of sport nutrition.
Oh gosh. Well, from a dietitian point of view, in the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years, it has exploded. It used to be, back in the day, even when I was out of grad school in my first years at GSSI, I was the only dietitian on staff there, and so I had the responsibility of doing any consultations with any pro-Olympic NCAA athlete that came across our dockets. So, and there were very few full-time dietitians. I don't know if there were any full-time dietitians working for a sports team. Everybody was a contractor. And then CPSDA, the Collegiate Professional and College Professional Sports Dietitian Association. They came along and they started advocating for dietitians. So almost every single professional sports team has a dietitian now. At least a contractor, but many part-time. And schools have multiple dietitians. So from that perspective, it's grown a ton.
And do you think I'm going to shut up. We have a question.
Got a question here.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm actually the Health and Exercise Science Communication Specialist. And so we get a lot of students that have kind of a similar trajectory. We really still get a lot of athletes that think that our department sounds interesting because health and exercise is something that they're into personally. But then they get here and it's a lot of hard science and research and they're not really sure. But we want them to find a pathway that works for them. So do you have any advice for us on the academic side for undergraduates or graduates that are trying to find their pathway, something that we could be doing to facilitate them finding that pathway just a little bit faster?
You know, I think, I almost feel like finding my path was pure dumb luck, but I think giving people opportunities to try multiple things. I think that's sort of key, because there are going to be different things are going to spark curiosity in different people. For me, like the hard science, I love that part of it, you know, and I think maybe for people who feel scared off by it, just understanding that the better they learn that, the better professionals they're going to be, you know. So I hope they don't get scared off by that. But I think exposing people to lots of different avenues and lots of different experiences maybe can help them find their path sooner.
So Kris, I'll ask a question as well. So when it comes to sports nutrition, it seems like, you know, everybody's the expert, you know, and it's really hard to keep up with all of the latest supplements or the latest ideas. You know, should individuals who are following or who are engaging in ultra distance running be on a keto diet to maximize fat oxidation and have changes occurring in muscle that's going to benefit them? So how do you stay up with all of the latest fads and facts?
As a dietitian,
Yes.
I read. I mean, I don't know that there's any way to stay up on research without reading. I think, you know, sometimes it's really nice, even though it's anxiety-inducing, to, like, for me, I'm in a position where I have to speak at times, and so it forces you to go back and stay updated with the literature and make sure that you're on the cutting edge. But yeah, I don't feel like I'm answering any of these questions very well. I don't know that there's a way to stay up on the latest research without actually, taking time out of your schedule and just reading. I don't know that there's any, and talking to people. I think talking to other people who are in the field is always helpful as well. Again, I don't like the term networking, but I think every profession is a bit of a small town, and you can get to know people really fast by just going to meetings or joining groups, and so you can learn from what other people are doing too.
Kris, I want to pull on that thread of industry-related research being driven by business priorities, and maybe your imagination doesn't get to the test drives that it might elsewhere. We talked about this a little bit last night over dinner. Do you see a future for carbonated sport drinks? I'm just... Honest answer.
Honest answer? I mean, okay. Honest answer, from a physiology standpoint, carbonation can really accelerate gastric emptying, right? Because it's increasing gastric distension. So on some level, theoretically it could work, but no. I don't think anybody who's participating in sports wants to drink a carbonated beverage. I think from a palatability standpoint, it's just a bad idea.
And I should provide a tiny little bit of context. Both Dr. Melby and I, long before we met one another, were working on such products because a particular company that starts with a P and ends with an EPSI was insistent that this is going to be sort of their niche. And so...
Well, which I wish we had had that conversation earlier, because so Kris recruited me at a Colorado run to participate in his study for this sports drink. And on the day that we had to do a 10K on the track, and then the day that we came to do this study, it was cold and raining. And he's like, you don't have to drink if you don't want to. So, so that probably wasn't so good.
So, great talk. So my question is kind of along these lines of sports nutrition, keeping track of the literature, but also how you engage with your clients, right? So, many of us in our program might be personal trainers, sports coaches, whatever, but you have experience with the top level athletes. So I'm curious, your experience, when you have an athlete who comes to you and asks you something like, should I be consuming a carbonated sports drink? How do you engage with those individuals and break down those barriers of what they think they know and what they might be missing in science?
That's an excellent question. I think the first thing I do is I try to spend as much time listening as possible, trying to find out what their motivations are, what have they heard, where are they coming from, and just get a sense for why they're asking. If it's about a supplement, what specifically about this is appealing to you? Trying to gain as much information about their motives and what they know already coming forward, because maybe they have no idea, right? They heard this from a buddy of theirs, and so they're going to try it themselves. So, but I've run the gamut of athletes who are so eager to learn and just like a open book, and they just want to know, what should I be doing? And then I've had a professional basketball player one time sit with his arms crossed, his legs folded. He's like, what are you going to tell me that I don't already know? And I think, maybe nothing at all. But, sometimes you can break down barriers and sometimes you can't. And so I mostly just try to listen and find out where they're coming from. And then if they're a person who's very receptive to receiving a lot of information, then it really opens up the door for you, and they're easy to work with. And then there are some people you just have to spoon feed them a little bit at a time for what they're ready to handle. And they may not make changes for quite a while, but if you can get them a little bit of success and or get them to even trust you a little bit more, then they're a little bit more open to other things that you might have to say. It's just it's a relationship, I think, like anything else.
Can you name drop for us? Favorite professional athlete you had an opportunity to work with?
Oh, well, you know the answer to this. Dirk Nowitzki. I got to work with him. The year he won MVP, actually, he was in need of some help and called me. So that was probably my favorite. But I've actually met. There are many professional athletes actually who are really, really, really great to work with. They're very open.
But you got to work with Dirk the year he was the NBA MVP.
Yeah.
And if we wind this long and winding road back, we can really attribute that to Kris Melby, I think, don't you think?
He's responsible.
It's remarkable, the connections that we have here. So it's neat to see. Hey, one more question, if I can. You know, you talked about sort of the growth in utilization among sport teams of sort of sport nutrition. It's more at the professional forefront than maybe it was 20, 25 years ago. Do you think that scope has expanded far beyond simply what do I need to do to compete well during the hour or 2 hours under which I'm sort of whatever the athletic endeavor happens to be? And if so, can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah, I think with sports nutrition, it's much more thought of as a 24/7 kind of a nutrition plan from the time they wake up in the morning to the time they go to bed at night, whether that's, obviously pushing breakfast or whatever. But also I think recovery is really, really big. Hydration's really, really big. Protein synthesis at night is really big. I think it has become, I feel sorry for a lot of dietitians because sometimes there's only one of them to manage a lot of athletes. But I think the emphasis really is on 24/7 nutrition and obviously learning how to fuel during games and competitions, but really taking care of the whole nutrition component from the time they get up to the time they go to bed.
And maybe one or two observations from that broad perspective on athletes, and how can we apply that to healthy, free-living individuals who are not competitive athletes but are interested in continuing to be healthy, free-living individuals for as long as they possibly can?
Yeah, it's important.
Any tips we can send our listeners off with today from your experience?
Probably not. I think people have to first want to do that. I think that's the step one is people have to want to eat right and take care of themselves throughout their day too. So I would call myself a reluctant dietitian because I've never been the person who wants to tell people what they should eat or when they should eat or any of that. But because my viewpoint, I guess, is always coming from it has to come from the person who wants to make changes. And I can help them make changes, but I'm not going to convince you that's something that you need to do.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Let me make at least a comment here. I think one of the things that is such a joyful experience in life are the relationships that we are able to cultivate. And it's an incredible experience for me to see Kris, blossom from the time that I first met her more than 30 years ago, to this vibrant, confident, woman who has accomplished a lot. But one of the things that I like about her so much is she's just really honest and humble. And as a former mentor of hers, I feel like now she's mentoring me. And it's such a special opportunity to have you back here and to be able to interact with you more. And I just am very honored to have the opportunity to introduce you. And I want to, as a part of the audience here, thank you for all that you've done and for your inspirational words for us today.
Oh, thanks, Kris. Well, let me just say this. It's a humongous honor for me to be here too, so thank you for your time.